Yeah.
Let's go.
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Okay. Hit the button.
It's hit.
It's hit. Oh, so that was. Just cut that out. Anyway,
no,
hey.
I think that's important for people to see the spontaneity and what goes into making this. We'll see.
It's going to be a long video anyway, though.
It is, so a few more seconds don't matter.
Okay. All
Starting
right.
now.
All right. Hey, everybody. I'm Ben Yee. I'm secretary of the Manhattan Democratic County Committee.
I'm Melissa Stein, and I'm a county committee member of AD 66 Part A. I'm also secretary of that part.
Brilliant. Fantastic.
Yes.
So we had a county committee meeting last Monday of the full county committee. So
everybody in Manhattan.
That's right.
Who showed up.
Who showed up? There were a lot of people there, though.
There were a lot of people. I heard 750, which is amazing.
That's a lot.
But there are 2,000 seats.
Just about.
Right. So it's more amazing than usual.
Definitely.
But still, more than half the people didn't show up.
That's true.
Okay. We've got
Well, I mean, a lot of the seats were vacant as well. So, you know.
So somebody needs to get their act together and fill those seats.
It was probably a good turnout for the number of people who are actually on the county
And filling
committee.
seats, that's another thing. But having gone to my very first county committee meeting, it was quite the experience. I have a lot of questions.
Okay.
And a lot of colorful commentary as well.
That makes a lot of sense.
Right. So we thought that it would be a great idea to sort of break things down a little bit about what happened, what worked, why one of us walked away very frustrated and one of us walked away very excited.
Guess who?
Guess who? All right, so we're just going to dive right in. I'll start with this question.
Yeah.
It seems like one of the main purposes of this meeting is to vote for the party leadership.
Oh, yeah.
Who decides who's running? Because basically, we just had a slate of people to vote for. No choices, no discussion, no biographies, no nominations. We're told X is running, vote yes. Who decides who's running?
Right, excellent question. So, in theory, anybody can run from the floor, or be nominated from the floor, I should say. And as long as you have a nominator who's on the county committee and a seconder, you can run. And in reality, we actually had a couple of contested elections on Monday.
We did, although the people who had to take those nominations were not very happy about it. Let's just put it there. There was real discouragement about anybody from the floor proposing anybody.
Yes, this sort of goes to the fact that the folks who are currently in charge of the county party, and this is actually true of most organizations, I think, certainly in which I participated, where they hold elections for leadership, the folks who are currently in office and in charge, generally, when they're running again, it's assumed that they'll be reoccupying that position. And the slate that county put forward this year is really developed by the highest leadership of the county party. So it's probably a combination of the county leader and the current county chair, and they put together the folks they'd like on their team, and people who were there previously, and most of these folks had been there for the last 2 years, myself included, run again.
Right.
And so that slate sort of comes pre-made by whoever ran and won in the previous election.
So
folks from the floor, however, can be nominated, and we had a couple of contested elections, and I tell you, it was certainly a major improvement over my first county committee meeting, where there was, we're going to talk about the rules hullabaloo later on, but when we ran somebody, when the Young Democrats, we got a bunch of people elected in 2009, and we ran somebody for third vice chair, there was a giant to-do about that. This year, the contested nominations were basically allowed to go through, even though there was a little resistance.
So yes, so a couple of people did get up and nominate themselves, or have somebody else nominate them.
Yes.
There's confusion surrounding that as well. But wouldn't it make sense, as a person brand new to this table, but very excited about being there and participating, to share information beforehand? Because basically you walk in cold to this meeting and are told, this is who you're voting for, and they were here before. So it felt like there was no opportunity to make change happen, to really participate in an active way. It felt like a rubber stamp. So as a new person who now has fulfilled my duty, because unless something comes up, like a midterm vacancy, I'm done with my term.
Well,
it's only been a week and a half old.
Because of what happened, and we'll get to this later, we're going to have another county committee meeting, which is super exciting. We'll get to that in a second. But insofar as disseminating information beforehand, I think this is actually a tremendous issue. And I had a meeting with a bunch of district leaders before this went down. And if you watched the live stream or you were there at the meeting, you'll notice that we had a segment at the very beginning where I presented about what the county committee does and why everybody was there.
That was so great. And there were still hecklers in the audience who said, sit down and stop talking.
Stop telling people what we're doing.
Stop telling people what we're doing. So that felt like a real push towards keeping things as untransparent as possible. So thank you,
Right.
Ben. Thank you for giving us that mini civics lesson.
That was my pleasure,
That
and
was
certainly,
actually wonderful.
it's theoretically possible that that person who shouted out to stop giving the presentation on how all of this is supposed to work and what the county committee does, that they'd been to many, many county committee meetings before where most people were insiders and knew what was going on. So, which is why I asked the audience. I asked how many people here are new and how many people, don't know this stuff. I would say half to 2/3 of the audience raised their hands.
Well over half.
But it could have been the other way around.
Right.
And if it had been the other way around, we might have reconsidered the value of taking up time for
Right.
that.
So it was interesting because it seemed like there were some people who were looking for more transparency.
Yeah.
As somebody who's never done this before, I didn't know that there was a lack of transparency, but I will say that the fact that many people in the audience weren't notified of the meeting and only found out about it through friends who happened to be on it or through their local Democratic clubs that they were elected through.
Right.
Postcards were sent out from the people organizing
Postcards were
it,
sent to...
but not everybody
yeah.
got them.
Right.
So there seems like there could be better communication all around.
Yes. So, all right, going back to the issue of communication in particular. So, the district leaders that I spoke to also had a sense that it would be nice to inform people more of what the county committee does, how it works beforehand, which is how we ended up with this presentation. And there wasn't enough lead time on that to put together a package to send out. But even if there had been,
Right.
I mean, it was basically, most of the slides were taken straight from the Real Politics 101 that I do because that's what we had on hand.
Right.
But
and they were very effective in this setting.
I'm glad to hear that. But even if we had put everything together initially, the Manhattan Democratic Party, or the party in general, everywhere, doesn't receive any additional information on how to contact county committee members other than their name and their voting address. So, some people, the postcards were sent out, and some people got them and some people didn't. Now, we were just talking before that we were shooting that there's folks who who are on the county committee, but their address is listed incorrectly.
Yes.
So anybody who's got that situation will not receive that postcard because the only information that the party receives about the county committee members who are elected is their mailing address or their voting address.
Right,
really.
and that's something, and we're going to talk about the rules, hullabaloo.
Yes.
But a rule could be as well that getting other forms of communication would be really important because I find as the secretary of just my part, it was really frustrating because we didn't have any email addresses and we had no
Yes,
way of
right.
notifying people about this meeting.
That's right.
So we're sort of scrambling with the district leaders to get email addresses from the people that they appointed, also the people who had run on their own. But it took a lot of time and energy where it would have made sense to just hand around a sign-up sheet at a meeting and say, could we please have your email contact information? Or if you're choosing to run or be appointed, share that information from the get-go so then there's not this mad catch-up to try to reach people when you need to, because we really needed to let people know about this meeting. I believe when I skimmed the rules, it said that there should be 10 days notice of a meeting, 10 days of
So before we get
written.
yeah. Okay, so to address that point briefly,
That was a
and then get
tangent.
back to the
That's not one of our real questions.
communication part. The 10-day notice is for all meetings other than the first meeting. The first meeting gets 5 days notice, and the reason for this is, and I was told this is an election law, but I think it might be only in the party rules, so I'm going to have to check on this.
Okay.
But there is a mandated window after the primary in which the first meeting needs to be held. And because of the time it takes for the Board of Elections to certify contested races, the county committee gets leeway in how much notification they're to provide for
Got
the
it.
first meeting only because of the shortened window.
The time constraint.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll still publicly say that there's a 5-day notification
At the minimum, yes.
rule. I got my postcard on Monday and the meeting was on Monday, so it didn't work. And then not everybody even got a postcard, so that's something
Right.
that perhaps
Yes.
things can, one of the things that can be looked into. Okay, so now that we kind of got that part out
I
of
wanted
the
to just
way,
the email thing real fast though, electronic
Yes.
communication. The way that the party gets the mailing addresses or the voting addresses of the members of the county committee who ran in the election is from the Board of Elections. And because you only file your petitions with your name and your address, there's no additional information that can actually be requested at that time. At the meeting, we set up a text hotline,
Yeah, that
as you
was
might
great.
remember, so that people could send in their information so that we could try and gather as many forms of communication as possible. But prior to the meeting, it's actually very difficult to get
Right.
additional information out there. However, I will say this. For the
Yes.
first time, the postcard included on it a notice that the rules are online and you can go to a web page to view all the rules of the county party. I think for the next meeting, what would behoove the party, and I guess as secretary, this is something that I'll be working on pretty hard to make this happen.
Thank you.
We're going to do a web page that is a briefing on how these meetings go down, references to Robert's Rules of Order, the party rules,
Oh, great.
and what the
So-
county committee does. So people who
Like a
are
facts page.
right. So when people receive that 10-day or 5-day notification, they have a place to go that will tell them how this goes down.
Great idea, because many of us sat in the audience having no idea what was going on and wish that we had some information
Yeah.
from the get-go. And having a place to go and read about it in advance would be really helpful.
Yes.
All right, so now we talked about some of the broader things, and I'd
Yeah.
love to jump into the meeting specifically.
Let's do it.
All right, so first up, one of the first things that happened in this meeting is that temporary positions were filled.
Yes.
2 questions. Why was there a temporary chair and a temporary parliamentarian and a temporary secretary? And who decided who the people were that we were all sort of voting for by rubber stamp?
Right. So the rationale for all the temporary positions is that after the primary, the entire county organization is disbanded.
Ah.
Right? So nobody's been elected to fill any of these roles. So you can't have the people who previously occupied them continuing in their roles. That's also a conflict of interest, right? Because they want to manage the meeting in a way that's beneficial to them if they're running for re-election.
Okay, that's fascinating, and that would have
Yeah.
been really helpful to hear.
Right. So that's the rationale for that. So the
Okay.
idea is you have to go through the election of a temporary secretary and chair to conduct the very meeting at which you're going to elect the permanent
Right. So they're just
positions.
fillers
They're just fillers.
until the election takes place, and then you have a full-time person again.
Correct.
Interesting.
In this particular case, and very often,
Right.
as long as there's no real opposition, the current chair will be the temporary chair, and the current secretary will be the
Well,
temporary
this was
secretary.
not though. There were
Yeah, so
There's
there
a
was a difference in the
different
chair, but
chair.
I was temporary
There's
secretary,
and then there's also a temporary parliamentarian.
yes.
Now, there wasn't a permanent parliamentarian elected,
We never-
was there?
Yeah, so personally, I think the order of the meeting should be changed. This is specified in the party rules, though. The
It's part
order
of
of
the rules
the
hullabaloo that we'll talk about.
correct, but in
Hope you guys
reality,
are getting excited for that rules hullabaloo.
oh, it's going to be
because
great.
It's going to be
It's
great.
going to be so good when we get to that. But really, in my opinion, for whatever reason, the election of officers other than the chair and the secretary is after all other business. We should really elect all the officers, including the
course.
parliamentarian, first thing, and then they can preside over a meeting in which all other things
Right.
are addressed.
It was interesting because at one point somebody got up and said, I do not believe that this was a valid election.
Right.
I want to speak to the parliamentarian.
Right.
And the chair said, we don't have one, that's me. And since he was being called invalid, yet he was the one to say, too bad.
Right.
It felt a little dictatorial to many of us in the audience. And that was another point that was kind of shoved aside and not listened to.
This is one of those, parliamentary procedure is arcane and can be very annoying for very many people, but that's a perfect example of why you really need people who understand
Yes, absolutely.
parliamentary procedure.
So that's my, I have another question before we get back to parliamentary
sure.
rules. But what's up with that voice vote? It seems to me that when everybody's
Voice
screaming,
voting, I love it.
yeah, or
Yeah.
no, if you have particularly loud screamers, they win,
Right.
regardless of whether it's 5 people or 25 people. It just seems a really sophomoric way of voting.
Right. So for those who don't know, a voice vote is when you're voting on something and the chair just says, okay, all in favor, and people say yay, and then all opposed, and people go nay, and the chair is meant to decide
Yeah.
which sides seem to have more people
It's
on
like
it.
one of those online singing shows. That's what it felt like to me.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So the rationale for that is if the vote is not close, you don't want to waste a bunch of time trying to count people or calling the roll.
Right.
We actually had a situation last night, or not last night, but on Monday, in which a voice vote was taken, and then it was challenged, and a division vote was called, and it reversed the outcome of the voice vote. So we had a contested election for, I think it was third vice chair, actually. The voice vote was called in favor of one candidate, and a division vote was called, which reversed the voice vote.
What's a division vote?
The division vote is
What's a division vote? I've never heard of that before.
a division vote is what we normally refer to as raising hands. Okay?
So the raising hands vote.
Correct. And then
Okay.
you count the hands.
Right.
It's unrecorded though, so if it were like 5 hands to 100 hands, you wouldn't have to count everybody.
But you
just
get a
say-
general sense.
Correct.
But it seems to me to be a more effective way of voting, because that voice vote was chaos. And there were other ones that were so close, the chair sort of was like, I don't know.
I completely 100% agree. My personal preference would be for the division vote or the raising of hands, or standing and sitting, however you want to do the division.
That sounds a little tedious.
That should be the default mechanism. But what I will say is that whenever a vote is called by voice, it is always in order to then say division vote. A motion for a division vote.
Okay.
And as long as you do that, the division vote will be taken, and you can,
And that can
do
shock.
every vote in that way.
Right.
Correct.
So here,
and
that
you can
brings
go
me
right
back-
to it.
This worked out perfectly, because now it brings me all the way back to my parliamentary
Okay.
question, which is, why wasn't the meeting run better? There were moments where a motion was made, a motion was seconded, and then it just never went anywhere. And then another motion was made, and it just seemed like there was a real sort of lack of structure, and without somebody in place to kind of say, hey, wait, let's take care of business the way that you're supposed to take care of business, things sort of fell apart.
Yeah. And this is again why parliamentary procedure and having people who understand it is so important, even though it is very tedious and dense. But the answer to your question is that parliamentary procedure is tedious and dense, and we didn't have somebody empowered to be a proper parliamentarian. Now, there's a lot of reasons why that could happen. The first being that very few people really understand parliamentary procedure well enough to speak concretely and confidently in a contested situation. So a lot of this meeting is meant to be sort of pre-scripted, as you saw,
Yes.
and a lot of the questions you have sort of revolve around that fact. And one of the reasons for doing that is to prevent the need or to prevent sort of conflict. Now, it has all sorts of other consequences, many of which are not positive, but
Right.
but one of the rationales for having a scripted thing is it makes taking minutes very easy, and it prevents the arising of conflict in which you would need a deep knowledge of parliamentary procedure.
Right.
That said, we are the Democratic Party. We're supposed to be an organization which is steeped in rules and laws and governance.
Yeah, okay, so that
And so it really
meeting-
behooves
Yeah.
us to get folks who understand this.
Right.
I certainly had a lot of opinions on how parliamentary procedure was applied on Monday, but as secretary, it's not my role. I'm not empowered to
Right.
do anything about that. It's up to the chair and the parliamentarian to figure these things
Well,
out.
first of all, I would say biennial for parliamentarian for county committee,
You-
because you seem to know more about how things should run than the people who are running the meeting. So that's the first thing I'd like to say, and I think that you should run for that next time, and I'd happily vote for you.
But then I wouldn't be secretary.
Oh. Okay. So
And even then, while I do feel that I'm well versed in parliamentary procedure, there are people who are more well versed, and in
maybe
those
it's
edge
finding the
cases.
right, there's finding the right candidate.
Yes.
Okay, so that leads me to this. 750 people there, many of whom first time, enthusiastic, excited, going local, doing their civic
Yep.
duty, could not wait to be there.
Fantastic. It was beautiful.
But by the end of the meeting, many of us were discouraged and frustrated and felt like, really, this is it? We're just here to kind of rubber stamp what the party decided that we should be rubber stamping?
Which is saddening.
Which is such a sad thing, and it makes you wonder why. Why? So what else is there for a county committee person to do? Are there committees that you can join? Are there other ways to be involved and engaged?
There are, and I will address them, but the first thing I'd like to say is what we saw happen at the county committee meeting on Monday, which was a bunch of contested elections which were allowed to go through without much conflict, which was a very deep discussion on how to address changes to the party rules. that only happened because of the involvement of new people who wanted to see a better Democratic Party. So don't think that just because you showed up and you didn't get to vote on everything you wanted and you felt that you were there to be a rubber stamp, the fact that you were there changed the way that meeting happened. It changed the things that were addressed in the meeting, and it changed the way in which the party dealt with those issues. So first and foremost, being involved, just showing up to a meeting like that, where you're empowered to vote and have a voice, changes the very dynamic of that meeting. So I want to put that on the table first thing.
All right, I hear you. I don't totally believe it yet, but I hear you.
I could go through 10 minutes of examples of all the things that have changed.
Because we have a lot to talk about. But
I will say, in specific answer to your question, there are committees of the county committee.
Okay.
There's two kinds of committees. Committees of the executive board, which are mainly the district leaders, but those could be filled with members from the county committee as well.
Okay.
And committees of the county committee. And there, I think, are 3 of those. They're in the rules, which are on manhattandems.org/about/rules. And I forget what all those committees are, but they exist.
Okay.
And they are filled by appointment of the chair or direction of the executive board. So one of the goals I certainly have is to get a bunch of those fired up again and get folks involved in those. The next thing is, for the first time and as long as I've ever heard, the county committee will be meeting more than once this year. Normally we meet once every 2 years. We're in theory meant to be meeting within 3 months to discuss changes to the rules. So there are more responsibilities insofar as that, as the county committee is actually going to have an effect on how the party governs itself.
All right, that's cool.
And then of course you have the filling of vacancies, which comes up every so often, and it's sort of random, but is critically important, as you've seen this year.
Our last episode was all about
Yep.
these like last minute things we had to fill. All right, before we get to the rules hullabaloo,
Yeah.
which is so close, I have one more question.
Yeah.
There was a moment in the meeting where the chair said, there are no motions to consider, so we're skipping this. And I thought, I'm sure there could be many motions to consider. How would anybody know how to make a motion?
Right.
Where do they come from? If you personally have an idea as a county committee person, if your county committee together decides, like ours talked about writing a letter to Governor Cuomo about the Independent Democratic Conference.
Right.
And that would be a great thing to introduce at this meeting, but we didn't know what to do.
Right.
So how does that work?
Right. So there's sort of 2 ways to go about getting resolutions or new motions on the floor. The first is through parliamentary procedure in accordance with the rules of the Democratic Party. And we sent out the postcard notifying people about the meeting, which then had a link to the rules online. Now, again, I think a page which is described as a primer for anybody on county committee would be something that people are much more likely to actually go to if it's put on a postcard, and then will help guide people through the rules in a way that's productive for them. But at the end of the day, folks could have read the rules and had the knowledge of how to introduce things to the agenda before the meeting met, with the exception of the fact that they would have had to there's a discord between the amount of notice that must be given and the time frame for submitting ideas, resolutions, and rules changes. So that actually wasn't on the table under the rules of the party. So those 2 things should be brought in alignment, which is one of the proposed rules changes.
Okay.
And the other way is to do it through parliamentary procedure from the floor of from the floor at the meeting. And that would have required somebody to make a motion when new business was on the table, or when other business was on the table, which was an agenda item. And then it would have required a vote of the county committee to take up that business. But that's all Robert's Rules parliamentary procedure,
Okay.
which is not something that people are well versed in. We should, again, have a primer on these
There
things.
should be a primer, to hear somebody say, okay, so there are no motions, before anybody even had an opportunity to make a motion,
Right.
or have a conversation about it. That just was another way that many people in the room felt like a door was being shut.
Sure.
Because people did have ideas, and there was never an opportunity to actually get up and say anything.
Right, what should have happened, or what would have been ideal, I'm not saying what Nico did in that case was necessarily wrong, because there were no motions, there was a statement of fact, but perhaps a better way of organizing the meeting would have been to state when we entered each new agenda item. And so he would have said, we are now in other business. The point of other business is to blank.
That would have been great.
And we have no motions to consider right now.
Right. Especially since so many of us were new, and it just felt like we were dumped into the middle of something, like starting a movie in the middle.
Right.
That's what it felt a little bit like.
And
we missed the whole entire beginning part.
And I do think that to some extent you have to understand that a lot of these people have been doing this for a long time. Like that fellow who was like, hey, we all know this, why are you talking? A lot of people have been doing this for a long time, and they don't appreciate that, you know, for them, they're in the middle of the movie. And they want to dispense with things that they consider unnecessary or like a waste of time.
I understood. But especially after this past election in 2016, where there are so many galvanized people, one would have hoped that there would have been cookies, although we did have cookies
in the 66.
In 66, we had amazing chocolate chip cookies.
I got the tweet of the picture of the cookies, but no cookies.
Oh, the cookies were extraordinary. I was sitting next to the baker of the cookies. But, you know, something welcoming us, something saying thank you so much for participating, something about the party reaching out to embrace all the new enthusiasm and blood, and there wasn't. So, yeah, I understand for people who've been doing this for a long time, we're just like annoying puppies.
Yeah.
But to the annoying puppies, like, hey, where's my toy? Anyway.
I completely agree.
After that analogy.
Well, I don't know if they consider, like, it's probably not annoying puppies because everybody was on board with the idea of doing the presentation at the beginning to sort of brief people.
Right.
But then everybody falls into habits after the fact. I'm hoping that, and I haven't checked the list yet, but we had that text number. So
I saw everybody on their phones texting.
Hopefully we have a lot of phone numbers and a lot of email addresses, and we'll be able to do much more consistent and
just to
and
update
engaging
people want communication. People want information. I think the more that people know and have information about what they can do and how they can participate, the more people will.
Maybe we should just send a postcard or a mailer that's exclusively like, hey, here's the website and our Facebook and our Twitter. You should follow all of these things.
Yes, absolutely. A welcome to, not just to county committee members, but anybody else who might be interested in doing that in the future. It's a great idea because there's still a lot of vacant seats.
Yes.
But we're going to talk about that later. Now, if I had a drum roll, I would be drum rolling.
Okay.
The rules.
Okay, the rules.
So I will just set this up for people not at the meeting who might still be watching this. That
might still be. We're now 27 minutes in, but okay.
Are we really?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay. So I hope I have enough memory.
You can watch this in chunks, you know?
Yeah.
You can pause it, come back to it.
Yeah. Go to the gym. You could watch this at the gym and get a good cardio workout.
Exercise your brain and your body at the same time.
There you go, and your political sense. Anyway, somebody came up and said he was presenting the rules committee was presenting the rules for vote and that there were no changes. And he wanted the entire county committee to vote yes, that the rules would stay as is. And then pandemonium broke out and people held up signs that said no, and the audience started screaming and we didn't know why.
Right.
And then all these people got up to talk about other things with rules, and by the end of the day, or further on to the meeting, it came out that the rules committee had only met that day to discuss things, but hadn't met in the previous 2 years. So it wasn't like the rules committee was thinking hard about the rules. And then this exciting thing for those in the know came up that now there's going to be some rules committee convening to discuss rules and possible changes, and then there's going to be another county committee meeting to discuss it. Like,
what is this? What's going on?
That, because it was a lot of new things and a lot of confused people.
Right. So the proper procedure for all of this, if you want to change the rules of the party, and I think there's an argument to be made that we should be updating them.
And when you say the rules of the party, what the Manhattan
Democratic Party. Right.
Okay.
Doesn't pertain to the state, doesn't pertain to the DNC.
This
is just for our county.
It's just Manhattan. Okay.
Right, exactly. Just Manhattan.
Okay.
The rules right now specify that any changes should be submitted, I think it's within 10 days advance notice of the meeting, so that, or maybe it's 15 days, so that any proposed changes can be sent out to the county committee members. Now, the rules chair.
I just have to interject with one mind-boggling question. So there's an election, and there's not that much time before we're convened for a meeting.
Correct.
So I don't even know if there were 15 days for rule changes to be submitted to share with the county committee about the rule changes before we had to meet. So that in itself is a really inefficient
Okay,
and
so the
impossible
election was
system.
on the 12th, and we met on the 25th. So very barely. There is certainly no way that somebody who was newly elected to the county committee, unless they had been paying attention beforehand, could have figured this all out quickly enough to introduce new rules. So this is already a system that's biased towards people who have been in it for
and also,
a while.
But sharing the information, because
Yes.
if all the county committee people, including the new people, are voting on it, there's no way, since also there's no contact information, you can't email people.
You would have to
and
mail
if
them,
you
yeah.
had mailed it, the U.S. Postal Service is not going to, somebody can't make the motion in 15 days or, propose the changes and then have it copied, mailed, received to people who hadn't been elected. Like, that system just doesn't work. Am I
No,
not
I
getting
agree
it
with
all?
you. No, you're absolutely correct about that.
Right.
So the way the rules are written and the way that the county committee is convened for its first meeting is not really well set up to,
Actually make any change happen.
unless there is an active rules committee that is constantly reviewing the rules and updating them, which the rules committee does not really do. They basically wait for submissions of new rules, because obviously the folks who are in power right now, or at any given time, they think the rules are fine, work for them.
Right.
Unless there's
So
an egregious
this rule
problem.
is this is an egregious problem. You can't, especially if you have all these newly elected people, you can't expect them to vote on something or be able to make motions if they have no information about it, which is what happened.
Yes, exactly. And so this was sort of a confluence of a couple of unfortunate realities. The first is the submission of the proposed rules changes were really I can't remember if I got the email the day before the meeting or the day of. I think it was the day before the meeting. So there certainly was no time to promulgate this information to the members of the county committee. However, a bunch of these rules, had merit. I think they needed some editing, but they could have been amended on the floor.
Right.
But the idea of the folks who submitted them was to introduce them from the floor, which was ruled by the chair as out of order. Right? They weren't supposed to be doing that.
Right.
Because, and this was the report that the rules chair gave, there were amendments that were submitted, but they were not submitted within the proper time frame. Therefore, the recommendation of the committee, which is really, as far as I know, is that one dude.
That was one of my questions, like, who is that mysterious rules committee? But thank you for answering that.
I know nothing more than that there's a rules chair who was there for.
Right, who said,
I
"We're
mean,
not changing anything."
They probably only convened it once these changes were submitted, and again, that was like the day before.
Right.
so
Although the temporary chair got up and said that they talked about it, it was that day.
Right. I mean,
So either way, it wasn't a lot.
yeah, it wasn't a lot of time. And
Yeah.
so that recommendation was to let the rules continue as they stood and reject the amendments. Now, the big argument ended up being about whether or not amendments should just be rejected, or whether what we should do about the fact that people have ideas for how to change things. We had a
I think
really
that's called democracy.
Yeah, right. Well, there was a really convoluted process for doing this, but the result, I think, was very productive, which is there will be another meeting of the county committee, and so we're going to get, I think, the best of both worlds. The county committee has something very important to do, which is determine the rules by which the Democratic Party in New York is governed, and that means how a lot of our government is governed, because the Democratic Party is sort of, it has primacy in this city. So what we'll end up having is an additional meeting of the county committee. Thumbs up, I'm all for that. More
I'm
engagement.
all for that too. That's actually an awesome outcome.
And we're going to get a real rules committee formed.
How is that going to
And-
happen?
Well, I'll get to that in just a second.
Okay.
And then that rules committee will give a recommendation to the convened county committee, which will have ample notice of the report and of the proposed changes.
Okay.
So even though it was chaotic on Monday, that chaos is what results in democratic outcomes. So when people look and say, oh, it's just chaos, like this is a farce, that's not the farce. The farce is if nothing happened. The farce would be if everything were placid and every vote proceeded as scripted. The chaos is the democracy, and what we're gonna have now is probably a slightly less chaotic meeting in the future, but we had to have the chaos to get to that.
Okay, so you know what? That was a really good way of taking my frustration and turning it on its head. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that that this will happen. It was really apparent to many there and who talked about it afterwards that the chair really did not want that to happen, that they were trying to stop the conversation, that they were trying to make sure that things went on as I guess the de facto way they had in the past. And a lot of us were aware that they were stalling for time. They were hoping that people left because people did get up and leave.
Of course.
And then there weren't as many people there to be active, active vocal voice vote, denying the approval of those rules. So that's all cool. So now there's going to be there is a rules committee. Suppose somebody wants to participate. How would one get involved?
So the rules also specify the way in which
the rules
which
we can all read
committee
online.
is filled. That's correct.
Right.
Although I have an email that I sent out to the district leaders earlier, which maybe I'll just post up online, which is the relevant portions of the rules.
Okay.
So essentially, it works like this: the rules committee, the chair and the vice chair are appointed by the chair of the county committee, which is Dominica Minerva. That decision can be directed by the executive board of the county committee, which are the district leaders, with a 2/3 vote.
Okay.
All the members of the committee are appointed by the chair, and that membership may be directed again by the executive board with a majority vote.
Okay.
It may also.
So the executive board, I just want to make sure that we're clear about this. It's the district leaders.
Correct.
Anyone else?
The chair and the secretary of the county committee, so Nico, Minerva, and myself.
Okay.
We are ex officio. We don't have votes, but we can speak on the board.
Okay, so the executive board are district leaders.
Correct.
You guys can be there, but you don't vote. So it's the
Correct.
votes of the district leaders.
Correct.
Thanks. I just wanted to clear that up.
And the last way in which the rules committee can be constituted is by a vote of the county committee itself. So if we get to this next meeting and everybody decides this rules committee was not good, we don't like the people who were on, we don't like the way it was run, the county committee members at the meeting, assuming there's quorum, can put forward their own slate of people to be chair, vice chair, and members of the committee and vote on that. If that passes, it will reconstitute the committee, and the voice of the county committee is supreme. So that can't be countermanded.
So we do have power somewhere.
You have the ultimate authority. The largest body has the ultimate authority in the Democratic Party and in any Democratic little d process.
Right.
So
that's why it's so important to participate.
Correct.
All right. That was a good explanation. I have one more question.
Okay.
Which I remembered.
You remember it, so you don't need me to reopen the.
So at one point in the meeting, the temporary chair came back. I think it was because the chair didn't feel like reading the many names listed, to list all the people who had been nominated.
Right.
So they were filling the seats.
Yeah, for what?
For county committee who hadn't, for seats that were still open because somebody hadn't run.
Right.
And there were hundreds of people listed. Every, person after person after person. What's the point of running if you can just say, hey, I want to do this, and your district leader or Democratic club puts you on a list?
Right. There are maybe a couple of reasons for running. The first I would say is philosophical, which is it's the right way. Petitioning is important. Voter contact is important. One of the responsibilities or rationales or reasons for having a county committee in the first place, which I mentioned in the County Committee 101 at the beginning, was that the county committee is really there to engage voters and be folks on the ground for the Democratic Party and be a representation of their community to the party. So it's the right way to do it.
I want to interject right here.
Yeah, certainly.
And say, I understand that.
Yeah.
But the way that things currently work is if you are not opposed, you don't appear on the ballot.
Correct.
And there's no statement anywhere of people who have been elected. So it's sort of like you're the shadow elected official in that nobody knew you ran and nobody knew you have the position. So it's a little hard to engage the public if there's no public who knows that you're actually there to do anything. And that would be really helpful, I think. It would be great if county committee people could work on getting out the vote, of engaging more people, of working in their election districts to make sure that people are participating or registered to vote or want to switch affiliations.
Yes.
But there should be some way that the party shares county committee member information with people.
This is in fact one of the rules proposals. So there are people who agree with you. I'm one of them.
Thank you.
But as it stands right now, the main way in which county committee members are meant to function, but it rarely works out this way, is they participate in the Democratic clubs, which work in tandem with the district leaders. The district leaders are all listed online already. Again, there's a proposed rule to list all the county committee members as well. But it's, right now the thinking is you'll do it with your district leader and with your club, and those folks come together to form the division, which is the whole assembly district.
I feel like I should be on the rules committee, just saying. Okay, so back to why one should run instead of just be appointed.
Right. The practical, or I guess technical rationale is there's no guarantee that people won't run to fill all the seats in your area. And there's furthermore no guarantee that if there are vacancies that you'll get appointed. So the ability to run and the ability to petition is how we prevent district leaders and people who are currently in charge from controlling the county committee. It could be that all the seats are vacant all the time, and then the district leaders just fill everything by appointment, and they control blocks of votes, and the whole thing operates like a machine. The reason we have this mechanism,
like in Brooklyn, as we talked about last time,
although groups like New King's Democrats are using the petitioning mechanism and the right to run to break down machine politics and interject democracy in the system. So while it may not seem like critically important at the moment because there were so many new people there, can you imagine what would happen if nobody ran and there was no knowledge of this electoral process and everybody there had just been appointed by somebody higher up the ladder?
You'd have blocks of people doing whatever blocks of people wanted to do.
That's exactly right. And so that's why, that's why we even have that process.
Okay. That was a really good answer, Ben. And all of this has made me feel a little bit better from that chaotic meeting where I felt like I had absolutely no voice. And I'm finding out that, yeah, actually we did have a voice and we're changing things for the better and for the different for the first time in a long time.
Yeah.
All right, and with that...
I'm glad. That's
good.
No,
it's exciting.
I'm doing my job then.
Yeah, good work. And I'm looking forward to the synopsis, because there were a lot of people who were saying, I wish that somebody could just do like a write-up of the rules or a sense of what this is, because it's a very long document. I tried to read it and I got lost.
It is.
Like 10 pages in.
I mean, the synopsis, what I think we'll do is we'll paraphrase some of the most salient points, like how to make a motion. That's out of Robert's rules. Some of the committees that people can join and who to contact to ask if you can be on a committee when it's constituted. But you can't do a synopsis of all the rules, because then you just end up rewriting the rules. They're just sort of that. Right.
But even to give people a sense of generally what they are, what they cover.
Sure.
And then it can give people a sense of, this rule about you're not allowed to dock your mule outside a meeting, which isn't one of the rules.
No, it's not.
But there could be
But please don't.
Yeah. I don't think that you're allowed to in the city dock a mule.
That's probably true.
Probably. And if you can, then de Blasio is probably trying to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Right.
That reference back to the horse-drawn carriage thing. But that kind of thing, like there might be things in the rule that really don't make sense anymore, that would make sense to pull out. And so maybe they wouldn't be so overwhelming. On that note, I think that this was a little overwhelming.
This 43 minutes now? Yeah, it's hot. The sun's come up.
It's crazy hot. We were in the shade at the beginning.
I need a haircut. It's a lot. It's really hot under here.
I need a glass of water.
Yeah.
So on that note, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for watching. Yeah, if you made it through all of this, you're a trooper. Now you know a lot. It's fantastic.
Yeah. And if you're on the county committee, come to next meeting where we actually get to make change happen.
If you're not on the county committee and you've taken the time to watch 43 minutes of this, please contact me, ben@benjaminyee.com.
And I'll
try to get you on.
Yeah.
Because you're committed.
Actually, he'll try to get you to petition.
I'll try to get you petition.
There you go, not appoint.
And if there's a divisional meeting in your area, which there should be coming up soon, then maybe we can get you appointed in the short term as well.
Okay, and also a shout out to your local Democratic clubs.
Yeah.
If you want to be involved, that's a great way of starting on the local level, meeting people, local politicians, and starting to make change happen where you live.
Yeah.
All right, until next time.
Until then, take it easy, y'all. It's hot.